Good afternoon, Professor Bird. For us, it's a really great pleasure to have you today with us for the Honoris Causa. And my first question is in relation to the University Oberta de Catalunya and the Honoris Causa. I think that it's the first digital university to give you this honoris.
Yeah, it is. Let me say I'm absolutely delighted to be here. It's really exciting for me. And it is the first university which is entirely digital that has given me an Honoris Causa. I have an honorary degree from the Open University in the UK, but that isn't quite as radical as you. It still has some bits of digital and some non-digital. So this is a first for me, a very exciting first to be. It's my first totally digital university.
Congratulations.
Yippee!
Yes, and what does it mean, this Honoris Causa in your trajectory, in your academical trajectory?
I think it means a lot of things. I mean, I'm the kind of person who never imagined that I would receive such a thing. So for a start, it's a surprise, right? And it's very nice because you feel that a group of people that you admire and respect have noticed you and want to, in a sense, honour you. That makes you feel good. It really is feel good. But I think also, for me, I think of it in part as being Honoris Causa for all my colleagues, both in the UK, here, and all over the world, who work on ancient history and Romans and still spend their lives encouraging students that there's still something really worthwhile about the ancient world. So I think that in part it means most as a recognition that the subject I do is still important. I mean, the Romans would be amazed. The Romans were pretty sort of self-confident people, or many of them were. They would be amazed to think that 2,000 years later, people were getting this kind of honour for studying them.
That's true. So we go to the next question, why is the study of Latin so important for our society today?
I think there's all kinds of reasons for that. Now, I think that there are some good reasons and some bad reasons. And, I come from a country where, certainly in the 19th century, little boys, and it was largely little boys, a few girls, but were simply made to learn Latin grammar as a sort of, or partly as a kind of entry point into elite culture, but partly as a sort of almost a kind of educational punishment. And now it's very different. And I think that quite a lot of people would say, look, it's sad that not so many people, I think anywhere in Europe, learn Latin not in such great numbers as they used to. And I think that's true, and it is a bit sad. But I think that we're actually seeing different and more exciting reasons for learning Latin. And, that isn't in order to be able to recite reams and reams of Latin grammar. It's to get access, direct access, to a culture that remains very, very important. I think if people say to me, what's the reason for learning Latin? What's the one reason? I guess I'd say it is to be able to read at first hand, not through a translation, some of the literature that has been most important ever in the history of Europe. And one thing I also quite often say, and I think it's true, you could never prove it, is that since the end of the 1st century BC, there has not been a single day in the history of Europe when somebody has not been reading Virgil's Aeneid. It is a thread which goes right through European history from the Romans to now. And I think that it's exciting to play your part in that and to join in the conversation about it. Now, happily, Europe isn't just not just a descendant of ancient Rome, thank heavens. You know, there are many other different influences and different ancestors. But it remains the case that, you know, we get access to a way of thinking which has been utterly formative. I mean, how could anybody think they could understand Dante's Divine Comedy if they didn't know a little bit about Virgil? How could anybody read James Joyce if they didn't know a bit, let's go to Greek, about Homer?
That's true. And what makes a good teacher, Professor Bird? Which is your secret?
Well, you never know, do you, what makes a good teacher? Because it partly depends on who you're teaching. But I think that, I mean, if I ever give a piece of advice to people, you know, who are perhaps young lecturers, young academics who are just starting out, and they're saying, you know, how do you lecture? How do you interest people? And I think, difficult as it is, that what you have to do is you have to put yourself in the position of the learner, and you have to remember what it's like to be a learner. And I think possibly too many teachers think that the job of the teacher is just to teach and to say what they think the learner ought to hear. But I think it's the job of the teacher to constructively imagine themselves as the learner and to see what kind of conversation they can set up between them. I think it's about empathy, really.
Yes, empathy, and I think that also it's really important the use of the different languages, no? Because teaching versus divulgation, no? You find yourself a lot of times in different environments, no? So how do you do to tune the exact language?
Well, I think that's true, but I think it's pretty much a surface phenomenon in a way, because I mean, people often say to me, it must be completely different teaching students at Cambridge who are, you know, studying classics as their degree subject. That must be completely different from making a television programme about the Romans that, you know, 1 million or so people are going to watch. And in some ways it is, but in central ways it's absolutely the same. You know, I think the danger of popularisation is that people think that the audience is stupid. Now, the audience is not stupid. The audience may not know some of the technicalities, but they are intelligent people who don't want to be talked down to. They want to engage at a high intellectual level, even though they might not know some of the background. So what my students often say when they watch the television programmes that I've made, they often say that they recognise the ideas, they recognise. Now, you might do it in a different way. You might decide to leave out some of the bits of, you know, the really technical bywaters of Roman history. But essentially, I want to get across the same message. And there is a linguistic difference there, you're right. And you know, you're not giving, the people who are watching the television don't get an exam at the end of the programme, whereas the students get an exam. And so there are those kind of differences. But you know, students need to be interested as well. You know, and so it's not as if you can get up to a group of Cambridge students and just bore them. They just don't come next week if you do that. So some of those kind of ways of getting a rapport with them is almost identical, though there's a different end result. You know, like no exam in one case and an exam in the other.
In the other case, yes. And you start as the only woman between 26 teachers, all men. What has changed and what still do we have to change in this sense?
That's a big question, isn't it? I mean, it's true that when I first went back to Cambridge as a lecturer, not immediately, but for a few years, I was the only woman teaching in a very, very male faculty. I have to say, I had quite a good time. They were very nice to me, but it felt very odd all the same. And I think that it's changed in Cambridge since then. There's now about 8 women. So we're doing better, not well enough, but we're doing better. But I think that what really has to change is in a sense kind of how people imagine what a successful academic looks like. I mean, I think that, in Cambridge we've gone through a lot of, questions about how to encourage more women. We've got a whole load of facilities now which make it, to some extent, a better job for women. We have childcare arrangements and workplace nurseries, that kind of thing. And I think all that's very important. I would not in any way say that's a great thing. But all the same, I think still we tend to think of a professor of classics dressed in male clothes. And I quite often say to people, look, it's all of us who have a very male image of people who are professors of anything, really. I mean, if I bet I could do a trick to anybody who's watching this and say, close your eyes and think of a professor. Close your eyes, think of a professor. Well, what do you see? What do you see?
You see a male professor.
You see a male professor.
Yeah.
I close my eyes and I think of a professor, and I am a female professor, and I see a male professor. Now, that's the level of kind of instinctive or unthought out assumptions about where expertise lies, where authority lies, that is the real barrier, I think. Now, as I say, it's not that workplace nurseries, equal pay, and all those other rights of women in employment. Of course, they're important, but there's still a barrier in our heads, and we share it.
And how can we trespass this barrier? How can we?
I think this is an easy way out, but the first step is recognizing that we have it.
Yes.
And recognizing, I think, that we use quite unconsciously language about ourselves and the subject we study and our careers, which reinforce that. I mean, I often say to my students, and I don't know if it's the same in other languages, but I strongly suspect it is. I say, if you say a woman is ambitious, is that a compliment? And they say, no, it's not a compliment. If you say a man's ambitious, is that a compliment? Yes, it is. Now, that doesn't change anything overnight, but it sensitizes those students to the way that language operates, to block some people, and to, in a sense, give an easy ride to others. And I think that this is like old 1960s feminism, consciousness-raising groups. I think it's all you can do. It'll take a long time to work, and I shall be dead before we have equality in universities at that level.
Yes.
But it'll happen eventually. I'm quite optimistic. I won't be here to see it.
Yes. Well, me too. I'm optimistic, and well, we will see other changes. So let's move to the next question. You've written 15 or more books. You have a blog. You are very active in Twitter. I read of a journalist that said that you are like a Trojan woman. How do you organize yourself, Professor Bird, to do so many things?
I don't have any time off. And I sort of enjoy what I do. I mean, I think that sometimes I complain like I just have. I'd like one day at the weekend. I'd just like to do nothing. That would be really nice. And I haven't had a day doing nothing for a very long time. But it is very varied. What I do is so the days don't seem as if I'm always doing the same. And I think that enables you to cram more in, really. It is quite different making a television programme from writing a book. It's quite different. you know, and sometimes when I'm sitting making a television programme and, you know, it's taking forever because making television programmes is such a long process, it's unbelievable. You know, I think, oh, I'd really like to be in the library, you know, doing some work. But I think that's, you know, that's part of the trade, really. You know, you do different things, you spend different days involved in different things, sometimes teaching, sometimes researching, sometimes speaking, sometimes doing Twitter and things.
Daily. You are in Twitter daily, no? Active. And I would like to ask you about Twitter. Do you think that in a way it's a replica of the male discourse?
I don't think that it is as liberating as it was promised to be, you know? And I think that's partly male. I think it is that there is quite a, I'd say in English, a blokish, a sort of very masculine version of it. But I think also it's about quite how democratic it is. And I mean, obviously, there are some big social movements that have been launched on Twitter, things like Me Too. And so you can't deny that it has some effect. But we have to wait to see whether Twitter can, whether a hashtag can turn into a real organ of social change. We don't quite know that yet. And also I think there is something about the way that Twitter kind of pretends that you can talk to anybody in the world. But you can't, you know, you can tweet to the Prime Minister's account in the United Kingdom, but the Prime Minister isn't going to read it, you know. So there is a certain amount of deception there. Sometimes, I remember looking at when David Cameron was Prime Minister, it actually said at the top of his Twitter feed, I won't reply. If you want to reply, please send a letter. Well, you know, what's it for apart from, you know, putting out, you know, messages on behalf of the Conservative Party? And so you think that you're being able to engage with all those people you've never been allowed to talk to. But I'm not sure that engagement is quite as real as it's purported to be.
I imagine. So, and let's go to another hashtag, to Roman Barthino. When a program about Roman Barthino?
Right. Well, I hope that we will be doing a program soon. And what we're looking, it's only still very much in embryo. So I can't say too much, or I can't promise anything, but we're hoping to look at different parts of the Roman Empire and how they connected to Rome. And I think that Roman Barthino would be one very good place to be. And partly I think, you know, one of the pleasures about doing these television programmes, particularly for a British audience, is that I know that Roman Barthino is big here, but it isn't big in the United Kingdom. So if you can actually say, look, you know, you have a very limited view of, you know, of just a few big sites in the Roman Empire, but look, they're everywhere. You know, it's very, very, very exciting. I mean, we went in a previous series, we went to some amazing sites in Algeria. Now, it's quite difficult for British to visit Algeria, but it's possible. And it just made a huge difference, however. People they kind of knew that the Roman Empire was there, but the idea that there were wonderful things to go and see, I mean, it was, it's really good fun. It's not that they're unknown, it's just that they're off the tourist route. I've got friends in Morocco, for example, who say, working there, everybody in Morocco wants to go to they want to go to Marrakesh and the Islamic Morocco. But look, there's Volubilis, an amazing Roman site. So we're always on the lookout for these great sites that are just a bit off the British horizon. And so Barthino would be great. We haven't also, I have to say, we've not been to Tarraco. So that is another one which is on our list.
That's true. So, and in which other new projects are you working now?
Well, I'm doing one rather academic book about images of Roman emperors in Renaissance and later art. So it's not Roman images of Roman emperors, it's what people since the Renaissance have made of them. And that's been a very long and quite academic project. I hope interesting to people, but you know, it's my own little passion. But aside from that, alongside that, we're just finishing 2 programmes for the BBC on the nude in art from ancient Greece to now. That's been quite exciting to make, to say the least.
Mm-hmm. I think so. Professor Bird, I would like you to ask about woman and power, the next revolution, the immediate future. What still do we have to do?
It's really hard, I think. I mean, you know, and I feel, I suppose, simultaneously optimistic and pessimistic. I'm optimistic because, you know, I've lived through, in some ways, a revolution. I mean, my mum, who's long dead, but my mother was born before women in the United Kingdom had a vote, right? And she lived to see a female prime minister. Now, she couldn't stand the female prime minister, but still she could see that that was important. And, you know, in my own life, I mean, when I was a student, there were something like 12% of the students in Cambridge were women. And now it's almost 50%. It's not so good amongst the staff, but amongst the students. It's been a huge change. And so, you know, that's got to be good news for the future. But I think that it is still very, very hard for women to claim authority. It's very hard for women to be heard as authoritative. It's, you know, we still have that mental image of power being male. And, you know, I do. I mean, there's that. Yeah, I have to confess, about 10 years ago, I was on a plane. And, you know, when the captain speaks to you at the beginning of the flight and says, you know, we're going to be flying at 3,000 feet. And it was a woman's voice. And my first instinct, my split-second instinct, was to say, why is one of the cabin crew doing this announcement? And I thought, no, it's a woman pilot. And I thought, I just caught myself out being hugely conventional about pilots being a man's job. I've fought all my life for women to be able to be pilots. Some of my students want to go and be pilots, even after a classics degree. But when I hear a woman pilot, I think, I can't be a pilot. And, you know, I think we've got to do more to change the structures of power, which makes it all right, you know, where people, I think, often don't take women seriously. And I think that's both in terms of very high-level politics, but where it hits most of us is it's in meetings, it's in local politics, it's in, you know, like students' unions, and I think women's voices just don't get heard as much as. No, when you say that, people always say, but look, there's exceptions. And of course there are exceptions. You know, there have always been some exceptions. But actually I want it not to be the big exceptions. I want us to think of power as something that you can see being operated and shared by men and women. And again, there's a change, you know, there is a change, but it's a slow one.
Yes, there's really a change, but now when you were explaining me about the plane, I never been in a plane with a woman pilot, no?
No, it is, you know, and it was the first time, and it's not been often afterwards. Very rarely afterwards have I heard it. On the other hand, you know, I kind of sit back and I think, when I was a teenager, I thought that politicians, now thinking national politicians, they were all men in suits, and I was right. They were all men in suits. There were about, tiny, 6% or something of the British Parliament was female. Now it's different. It's around 30%. There really is a change, but it's not a change that is. Numbers alone are not quite enough. It has to be about assumptions. It has to be what jobs those women do. I mean, in the United Kingdom, there has never been a woman finance minister. So they tend to go to, education, social services, health. So they're still put into the caring bits. And, in some ways there's nothing wrong. We want good people doing the caring bits. I'd be very happy, to see good women doing that. But you still see gender differences. And probably that's no good for the country. We need the talents of the women. So it's not just about it being fair, which is obviously one point, but actually we can't afford to do without the talents of those women. Perhaps we wouldn't be in the mess we were in my country, if we thought about that more seriously.
Yes. And let's move to the digital university, to the e-learning. Which is the future of these universities?
I think there's going to be much more. And of course, you can't have a whole load of new technologies and new ways in which people access information, at home, on an everyday basis, and then somehow still say, but at a university, we don't do any of that. And we have to find ways, and you have, obviously, of really harnessing kind of the power of new technology to really enhance the experience of new generations of students. And I think that, even that is important. And I think even the most traditional universities in Europe, the world, learn from your kind of experience. And of course we do, because, I'm in one of the most traditional, old-fashioned universities on the planet, right? But my students and me, we don't. I sit at home now, and if I want a book, more often than not, or certainly a periodical, more often than not, I get it online. Now, when I started out, my first job, 40 years ago, I would have to get on my bicycle off to the library. It would take me hours. It'd take me, half an hour to get there, half an hour to find the book, another 20 minutes to find out if it's really what I wanted, take it out, bike back home. That's 2.5, 3 hours gone. Now, I've got instant access. And, I think in some ways, people in traditional universities have to be prepared to learn from people in digital universities, because the students have been brought up digitally. I still quite like giving lectures, and I think there may well be a role for them, but you can't just sit and say in Cambridge, we're going to do everything the same as we've always done since the 14th century or whatever. We have to be looking at people like you.
And the last question is, which advice would you like to give to the students at UOC, at the Universitat Oberta de Catalunya?
I think it's very hard to give advice, because different people want and need different things. But I think that students anywhere and everywhere they always get dispirited from time to time. You think university, however you're doing it, whether it's digitally, whether it's face-to-face, it's very exciting. And of course, there's always bits when you think, I can't do this. Was it a good idea? Should I have taken this on? And there'd be something to worry about if you sometimes didn't feel anxious. And I suppose my advice is just see those periods of anxiety through. everybody feels they're not good enough. You know, and if they don't feel they're not good enough, they've really got something to worry about. And you know, just keep on, because it's always worth it. It really is worth it. But sometimes you have to sort of say, yes, I am going to go on doing this.
And maybe you want to add something, any question I have not formulated and you would like to add?
I wonder what I'd like to say. I think, I mean, one thing I suppose to say is that, you know, people look at me, and I think in some ways this is partly for men, but perhaps it's more aimed at women. People look at me and they think I look very confident. They think I probably came from a family that had a long tradition of going to university, pretty privileged family, that I'd always been, you know, someone who spoke my mind and had a public platform. And none of that's true. You know, I was the first person in my family to get any sort of university degree. And when I was in my 20s, even up to my early 30s, you know, I would go to seminars and meetings, and I wouldn't be able to speak. I wouldn't be able to get my point in. You know, I felt frustrated the whole time that, you know, that I could never, you know, there were things I wanted to say. Every woman's felt this, I know. There are things you want to say, and you just can't get in there. You can't get in the discussion. Now, I don't know how I cured myself, but I did. I don't know how I did it. But I think getting older is one quite important thing. You get a lot tougher, you know, you get a much thicker skin. But I think that I know that people look at me and just think, oh, she's always been able to do it. So it's all right for her. She's always been. It's been a struggle. You know, and it wasn't, you know, I didn't sort of start out in life feeling the kind of confidence. I still feel anxious now about things. You know, you wouldn't be human if you didn't. But a sort of confidence that I can say, you know, I can get my point across. And, you know, I think, you know, keep on, really, because, you know, everybody's path to success in whatever has been more difficult than it looks.
Mm-hmm. There's a short definition about you, of a journalist, that is that you are learned but accessible. And I think it's a wonderful definition. Thank you so much, Professor Bird, and congratulations for the Honoris Causa.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm very, very excited to be here in Barcelona.